Hello. Hello, everyone. It's the end of a really amazing day, and we are so happy to be up here with you. I have two really fascinating people here on stage, so I'm going to keep my intro very short. But I'm Jane. I've been in crypto, really excited about crypto since high school, and then in this space since 2016 as an operator and an investor, and all of that led me to A16Z Crypto, where I'm mostly focused on investing in things that are going to bring more people into crypto and look like the next products that are going to be used and go viral on the internet. So just to set the premise a little bit here today, the idea is that you walk away from this panel really excited about this thing that we call crypto, and you deeply understand what the user experience on the internet is going to look like. Basically, in the previous era, which Chase will get into in a second, of Web 2, there was really little that users could do on the internet, aside from interact with siloed content streams run by centralized companies. And crypto is trying to disrupt all that, and that's really powerful. So to kick it off, Ted, you are such an influencer.
Obsessed with that bio.
Across this amazing space that we call Web3 Social. And I would love to hear a little bit about your journey into this space and how you started using Farcaster.
Thanks for the intro. Hi, everyone, and shout out to Boys Club for throwing an amazing summit. I am a new voice of the new internet. So when they talk about finding new voices of the new internet, I am living, breathing proof, meaning that I am a very much Web 2 normie. So I was probably one of the middle schoolers who was using Facebook when only high schoolers or college people were supposed to be using it. I was like one of the girls who did all my special HTML coding on MySpace when that was a thing, or custom AIM away messages. And then kind of as I grew up and worked in consulting and then did banking as well, everything from a social perspective, I wanted to be as private as possible. So I cared a lot about my private life. I didn't want people to know it. And so kind of all of those fun experiments, I turned into private mode and kept to be a very, very small circle. Flash forward to today where I have 100,000 followers across multiple platforms. And so when I first learned about decentralized social, I was kind of I don't really get it. I don't care that much about decentralized social. I haven't really put any content out there that would, I'm afraid of being censored, et cetera, et cetera. But when I started learning more about Farcaster and what it meant in terms of my social identity and the interoperability and monetization and how it was better for creators, it clicked for me in a way of wow, this is really interesting. This is the bleeding edge, and I think this is the future. And that I started an account on Farcaster, which is now you would interact with it as Warpcast, and kind of just leaned in and was I think this is the future, and if I think this is where the future is going, then I need to kind of put my money or my time and my effort where my mouth is, and really kind of build and try it out and experiment and innovate with it. And that is truly how I got to where I am today. It was just this authentic, very genuine curiosity and drive to understand what this technology is and how we can use it.
Amazing. We're going to talk about Club TED in depth in a second. But just to take it back a little bit, Chase, if you wouldn't mind introducing your vision, your mission with Uniswap Labs, and then also walking us through the current paradigm with UGC and Web 2. That'd be really helpful to start.
Yes. I'm Chase. I'm at Uniswap Labs. I'll walk a little bit through current Web 2 paradigms, and then I'll touch briefly on where Uniswap sees these things going, or where I see things going. So I think the first thing to address here is that we often talk in Web 3 and crypto about how shitty Web 2 is, but I kind of want to just start off on actually a very positive note, which is that Web 2 is kind of incredible. And I don't know, maybe that's a sin to say at a crypto
Hot take,
conference.
we like it. Here for it.
But when we really think about what Web 2 enabled, I think something that stands out to me is the power of user-generated content. So, before the internet, not everyone had a printing press, you know? It was not, like, actually speaking to people at scale meant writing a book or like going on TV. And the internet and social media platforms gave people like Ted the ability to be like a celebrity and an influencer, as Jane says. And so when I think about what really we're sort of building on top of as an industry, I think we've built this incredible foundation that is the ability for, basically a decentralized printing press, the ability for anyone to have a voice, anyone to become an influencer, anyone to create a brand, anyone to create a culture, even like Colin's talk touched on some of the stuff. And so when I think about like where we've come, that's really, really exciting. And the power of the last 2 decades has really been user-generated content. Of course, that has come with a lot of downsides, which Jane kind of alluded to, which is like the existence of this type of content and this value on isolated platforms that are sort of locked into specific siloed parts of the internet, and frankly, that are not explicitly owned by the people who create the most value in them. And so I think what's really sort of exciting and the limitations, what's exciting about Web3 and the limitations of Web2 are sort of inextricably linked in the sense that what I think we're moving beyond and pushing towards is actually an internet that feels like it's, owned and operated by the people who provide value. At Uniswap, we're really excited about universal ownership and exchange. That's sort of our mission. And our vision for the world is flourishing economies that are powered by universal ownership and exchange. One of the ways that we're really excited about evolving into that, which we'll get into later, is, we talked about user-generated content being sort of defining the last 2 decades of culture, of economies, and all of that. What we're excited about is the next decade being defined by user-generated markets and being able to spin up capital markets for anything, and liquidity really being something that unlocks a lot of possibility. So that's what I'm excited about, and that's kind of how I think about where we've come and where we're going.
Let's stick to social for a second, and then we're going to definitely dive into markets as well. So, Ted, let's talk a little bit about why the Web3 social space attracted you, specifically Farcaster, the network, and now all the work you've done on Warpcast itself, and what you think decentralized social generally enables for creators and also for fans and just normal users on the internet.
Yeah. So when Warpcast first came out, it's important to note that it truly looked like and felt like a Twitter copy. It was like a Twitter copycat, and I think the founders would agree with that and be like, okay, there has to be more. And so what was interesting was that you could create your profile, and also they were kind of early account abstraction. I think someone else mentioned it. It just means that you didn't have to go through like the painful create your own wallet, remember your seed phrase kind of whole process. So you just could spin up an account the same way that you could spin up an account on Instagram, Twitter, anywhere else. And so that to me was like a first unlock, because I hate kind of like interacting with all the different wallet providers unless it's easy and seamless. And so from there, you could then connect all of your other addresses. And so immediately you were able to link what your on-chain activity was. So like what NFTs or what like, let's say, collectibles you were minting and what was in that wallet with your social graph. And so at first, this was like uninteresting to me, to be honest. I wasn't like minting tons of NFTs, except for Boys Club, Zaddy, NFT, hell yeah. Don't know if anyone else has the Zaddy. And so that to me was like number one. And then when you start thinking about it, you're like, oh, Warpcast is this client, but as other apps started popping up, the way that you can think about it is, oh, instead of having to start on Instagram, like let's say you have 100,000 followers on Instagram and you want to start doing TikTok to diversify your content platforms. So this is like one thing is like if Instagram all of a sudden shuts down, like what happens to all of your followers on Instagram? Like how do you stay connected to them? Like the answer is you can't. Like you're just kind of trusting Instagram to stay alive and exist. But what Farcaster enables is that if like the Instagram equivalent goes down on Farcaster, all of those followers still follow you in that network and in the protocol. And so if you were then like, okay, I'm gonna move everything to Twitter, you're not starting from zero. or to TikTok, you don't start from zero. You can port over all of those followers. And you can kind of see Instagram do this between like Instagram and Threads. So that was like number one, was this, we can call it censorship resistance, but it's really like, okay, like I'm not completely dependent upon one centralized entity for my entire audience. And so that was like a huge no-brainer for me. Then the second is this idea, and we can talk about this a little bit, is like economies don't actually exist without societies and without people. And so economies are built on social networks. Economies don't exist in the absence of a social network. It's just not something that happens. And so I fundamentally, kind of like long-term view, is that like social network is the way that you will onboard, you know, 1 billion people, et cetera, onto crypto, because that is what we live and breathe and use day to day, right? Like you probably use Venmo more often than you use your Bank of America account, and that's because these like peer-to-peer payments and anything social happens. So that's like another thing too, is like, okay, the transactional elements that can happen through a decentralized platform is like, again, something that can't happen on Web 2. Like you can't pay your friend on Instagram for something that you might see. You can go to Depop or you can go to Poshmark to buy secondhand, but imagine if that could just happen in one platform and you actually know the person because you're familiar with them from other social platforms. And then kind of, I always do this from like just a normal user, but as I was kind of leaning into like, okay, what's possible and what's the experiment here? I started to think, okay, like, are there on-chain creators? And we've heard from musicians, and then we've heard from people leading video content platforms, but no one was really like thinking through what is the full tech stack available to creators, and how do you start building around it in a way that we're used to seeing Web 2 creation, right? So I'm not talking about like NFT artists, which is like a whole new type of creator for Web 3. I'm talking like, what would a Kim Kardashian look like? Like, what is she uniquely able to do in crypto that she's not able to do in Web 2? And so now you're able to launch membership platforms, you're able to launch exclusive like token gated or like membership gated content, experiences, et cetera. The way that you can work with brands is new and innovative. All of my members of Club TED get rewards. Like they're getting rewards from me succeeding in a way that is very small in nature if you compare it to like Kim Kardashian. But if you think about if those creators poured over, it's a pretty compelling case study and example for them to be moving over to. So that's just a couple. And then the last thing is also data. Like all of the data on, like Instagram would never give you your data on your users. Like I'm sure you've seen this like from creating too, is like you have no idea who follows you on Twitter or like what their interests are. And what you're able to do with decentralized social is pull all of the off-chain data, which is like, what are they talking about? What are they tweeting about, I guess is the comparison. What photos are they putting out there? Who else are they following? And then like pair that with the on-chain data. So like, how are they actually transacting? Like, what do they care enough about to spend money on? And then be able to then curate perfect, like almost perfectly aligned and targeted content or collaborations for the people who are following you. So anyways, for me, that was just like a complete no-brainer and was like, wow, we might as well like continue innovating and experimenting in this realm.
If there were creators that were thinking about launching on Warpcast or launching a product in a frame or launching a token-gated community, like how would you suggest people start? And what do you think the obvious paths are for monetization that you've seen like worked so far in Web3 social?
Zora is actually like, definitely get started on Warpcast. I will help you. I will personally onboard you, like I kid you not. But Zora, I know we just heard from Dee and others as well. And then I actually was inspired by Chase. And so we started putting and deploying or publishing, I guess, our podcast on Zora. And you get blown away by the creator rewards there. So definitely use Zora. And then in Warpcast, you can actually mint in the feed. So you never have to leave the app in order to mint the podcast episode, which is huge. And then you can share it right away. So there's like the shareable content. Other things is like it's a lot easier to find your tribe and your community on Warpcast as well. So there's like a boys club channel, and like we all can hang out in the boys club channel. You realize, oh, this is so and so, and oh, this is what's going on. You can also create events and RSVP to an event in the feed. So it kind of depends. Like if anyone's getting started, I'm like, what's your goal? And then we can work backwards from there, because there's something for everyone. Like whether you're a musician or whether you're a author and a writer, etc. Yeah.
And Chase, now that Ted has outed you as a fellow content creator, could you tell us a little bit about how you started creating content in Web3 and about your podcast?
Yes. Shout out D if he's still here. He pushed me to mint the podcast on Zora. I think, so for me, like a lot of, kind of a similar story actually, in terms of just like, I fucking hated the internet. I was like, this sucks, and I feel addicted to Instagram. And so I was like kind of anti-internet. I'm obsessed with the signs here that say like falling in love with the internet again, because that just resonates deeply. And a lot of content for me has always just been like, okay, I discovered crypto. I got very excited about it. It felt like the answer to a lot of these challenges. It felt like we're removing, you know, again, siloed platforms and gatekeepers. And my content journey was basically like, okay, how can I talk with everyone about this? And I had a lot of people push me to like share those conversations. But yeah, that was very much my journey. And I think it's been incredible to see the way that a lot of those things have been like, that have resonated with people, basically. I don't know, I think it speaks to a lot of like what's possible in Web3, and I totally agree on like minting and understanding like, okay, who actually cares about certain things. It's also fascinating. Episodes for me, for the podcast, for example, that get like the most listens are not the ones that are most collected.
Right?
And so, yeah, there's all kinds of interesting nuance and dynamics there, but.
Why do you actually think that is? Like what types of podcasts get the most collected? Does it come down to like the brand of the participant more so than the actual like depth of the conversation per se?
I mean, I would be curious your take. I think this is funny because I think markets, this idea of like, how do we contextualize markets with societies? I think that kind of plays in here where like the episodes that get the most mints are the ones that have the largest amount of context around them. So like 0x Light, who's like very active in the base ecosystem, and I had on the podcast, that's like, I think the most collected episode because they have such an incredible presence around this stuff. Which I think speaks to like the power of culture in markets and like how much culture influences markets, even when they're user-generated markets.
Yeah, definitely. And like when users have the opportunity to own, they're going to care more about signaling of having something associated with their profile.
Yeah, I was gonna say too, I think what's unique about Zora as well is that you can mint like up to 111 mints now as like your super like. And so it's interesting if you think about it as like, oh, you listen to it, someone views it, they don't like it, they don't mint it. If they really like it, they can mint 111 of them. And so it's this interesting, like, it's almost for any marketers here, everyone talks about like the funnel, right? And so like you have top of funnel, which is like the listens and like, or the views, and then kind of this like whole on-chain activity is then going from like, okay, who is your super fan, and how do you go from that? And then one thing we've layered onto it is we've added a subscription. So like one thing that's really hard anywhere is like if you have to add a payment wall to your content, immediately you get afraid. You're like, oh no, if I have to add a payment wall, like, am I gonna lose half of my audience that's not willing to pay $5? And what you can do in Web3 or like on chain that you can't do anywhere else is like, okay, we will do a payment model and have people subscribe $5 a month. You immediately know who's willing to pay $5. And then instead of token gating or like paywalling your content, you just airdrop it and give it to them for free. So everyone can still consume it. So like that's another interesting thing that we found is the views, like the mints correlate with our super fans. Whereas like the views aren't really that good of a tell anymore these days, especially on, let's say, different social platforms where you can't really figure out the algorithm.
Yeah, definitely. When the monetization opportunity is at the point of the content, there's this like uncapped ability to become a patron as deeply as you want to, even, you know, minting a lot of the NFTs or subscribing, or even just like sending money to their address because you have that and you can do that freely, which is really cool. Okay, moving beyond social, I would love to just learn more about your views on how users are going to interact with the internet going forward, and just the opportunity to create different types of markets.
Yes. I'm very excited about user-generated markets. Like I said earlier, I think that's one of like the most exciting net new unlocks that crypto and Web3 actually provide. I think like taking a little bit of a step back, going back to this idea that like things are siloed and platforms control things. I think the history of financial markets has been primarily a story of financial institutions having control over what assets are tradable and valid and who's allowed to have them and how they're allowed to be exchanged. And so I'm really curious and excited about the future of what that looks like when you make it user-generated and what's possible there. I think one of the things that's most fascinating to me actually is like around like what does the future look like. I actually think it's very hard to predict. I know in the beginning of the day, the Bill Gates clip was played, and it was like hysterical. I love that clip because it demonstrates how much even he didn't understand what was about to happen. And I think similarly, like it's incredibly hard to conceptualize what's possible when you allow users to generate markets, not content, not, you know, I love the trad wife cooking content, but like what happens when we have trad wife, you know, tokens. Like that's the future that I'm excited about. And
You heard it here first, you guys. Trad wife tokens.
But I think we've already seen like the very early stages of what happens when you unlock liquidity for tons of different things on the internet. And so what I'm excited about at Uniswap and more broadly is really like, how can we take that and introduce that to the entire world? And yeah, what types of possibilities does that unlock? Honestly, I would be lying to you if I told you I knew.
Okay, but any ideas aside from
I think like FWB was of course like an early example of this that was really exciting. I think even some of the minting, the NFT minting stuff that we were talking about earlier is an example of this. Of course, like some of these meme coins are I think an early example of what happens when you take tokens and culture and marry them together. I'm really excited to start to see net new types of value being created. So beyond just having like my younger sister buy AI tokens, like how can she actually become an active part of those types of communities? And so I'm excited for us to figure out as an ecosystem how we unlock that type of value. But I have no doubt it's going to surprise every single one of us what ends up happening there.
Totally. So along this path to decentralize the printing press, as you said, where would you say that we are today? Is there like a reference point that you have for this point in the progress that we've made, and kind of like what's left of the work to be done?
Ted, I'm curious if you have a take. Do you mean in the context of user-generated markets, like
Markets,
decentralizing
content, just like allowing users to have more control over the content they're putting on the internet?
That is a great question. I mean, I think we have user-generated content, and I think we already have user-generated assets. So I think we're there. Like, is it easy to spin up user-generated assets right now? I think Zora's made it really easy. I think if you have technical skills, you can spin up a token quite easily. But I think once they start doing no-code, kind of like no-code token solutions, like if anyone can spin up a meme coin,
oh God, it's like opening the floodgates.
Literally, yeah, I know.
I don't know about that.
But like, that's what we're seeing on Warpcast right now. It's like a very technical community. Everyone's spinning it up. And so in a way, I'm like, oh, we're already seeing user-generated markets on a very micro level right now. And you can see like communities, I think about this a lot, is like, oh, communities end up, yeah, to your point about like friends with benefits, FWB being one of the first, like every community can have its own currency as well. And so to be able to spin up a user-generated asset, whatever your community asset is, and then use that as like to transact and exchange value, I don't think we're that far off from it. I think we're very far off from mainstream adoption of it, but I don't think we're that far off from seeing it happen.
I would almost say, like, the thing that comes to mind for me, which is a little bit weird, is I feel like we're kind of in, like, our blog era of user-generated markets. Like, when you look at user-generated content, there was a period of time where the blogs were the thing, and it was because we didn't have enough, like, discoverability mechanisms. We had the Rails there, but, like, there was a lot that still needed to happen for these things to be seamless. And I kind of think from, like, a user-generated markets perspective, we are kind of in that era where, like, a lot of this is still influenced by like people with a lot of attention and like that type of thing. And so yeah, that's weirdly what comes to mind for me. I think the Cambrian explosion happens when we go beyond the blog era into our Mark Zuckerberg era of tokens and user-generated markets.
Yeah, the discovery point is really interesting, and I think Warpcast has really enabled that over the past 6 months with tons of people joining, kind of becoming like the portal into showcasing what's possible with Web3 through things as simple as frames and channels, which is pretty exciting.
And of course, the Uniswap wallet has discoverability in it, so download wallet.uniswap.org. Had to get my shell in.
Well, that seems like a great note to end on. Thank you both. This has been so much fun. Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
guys. Wow.